Welcome everyone, and the purpose of this video is to do a little bit of a deep dive on this new mod, or maybe I should say the updated version of an old mod that is out there. So I stumbled across this because a week or so ago on the channel for the Great Book of Grudges, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Link in the description to the original video that I'm going to be referring to. But anyway, he does a quick rundown on the newest clan that has been added in the Great SKAVEN mod. And so what I wanted to do is test this out a little bit for myself, and then as I started getting into it, I thought, you know, maybe it would be helpful to do a little bit more of a deeper dive than what he does in that video. So I do encourage everybody to check out his original video, of course, but also hopefully this will provide a little bit more information in terms of how that campaign actually plays out. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the broader mod, and then, like I said, a little bit more of a deeper dive into the actual newest portion of that mod, that being Clan Gnaw. Anyway, so the first thing that you'll see when you come into this is that there are obviously a lot more choices here when it comes to your SKAVEN. So you, of course, have all of the original choices. We're not going to talk about these guys at all. But now, all of a sudden, you can see I'm not going to go through every single one of these and talk about every single aspect of them, but I wanted you all to get a chance to see just how much this mod, really mod collection at this point, you could probably say, adds to the game. So all of these are now, when you use Mixer, all of these are playable new legendary lords for the SKAVEN. And they do focus, there's a little bit of flavor text for them. Don't know if there's, yeah, there's a little bit of lore as well, so that's good. Anyway, so there's a little bit of a different feel, different play style for each of these different SKAVEN lords. So you've got Clan Fester here, you've got Clan Gnaw. These are the newest ones that were just added. And as mentioned in the aforementioned video on Great Book of Grudges, he talks about how these guys focus a little bit more on being like more savage than your other SKAVEN tend to be. So we're talking about maybe almost like the Wurzag version of the SKAVEN. Anyway, you've got Clan Vertkin here, and again, I'm just going to leave this for a second so you all can see the different lord effects and faction effects. But look at it, just how many of these there are. This is amazing. Okay, so then we have this is Clan Creepus. We have Clan Grudge. This one must be relatively new. I don't remember this from when I messed around with the mod before. I don't really know. It's like I said, it's been a little while since I've messed around with this mod, so I don't really know the chronological order that these have all been added into the mod. I would normally love to say, okay, let's test them all out. And probably in time I will get to them all, just kind of messing around on my own, but that's obviously going to be beyond the scope of a video like this. This one's dealing with, this is a Clan Morbidus here, a little bit more plague oriented. I did mess around with these guys. They've been around for a while. Clan Septic as well. I think many of these are sort of the greater Clan Pestilence, like ancillary factions, or secondary factions, you could say. They're all somewhat similar to Clan Pestilence, which of course is my boy Skralk, who I think most of you know that I love him. So this was very compelling for me to think about the additional clans here that have sort of a plague Skralkish feel to them. We have Bubonic Court here. We have Clan Verms. We're getting closer and closer now to the end. Clan Treacherich. We have Clan Ectric. Not really a whole lot going on with these guys. This is interesting. Yeah, there's a little bit of lore here, but there's not a whole heck of a lot here in terms of faction effects, so I don't quite know what the story is with them. I'll have to look into that a little bit. Clan Fisic. This is again, looks like it's a little bit... Oh, this is your anti-Clan Pestilence, it looks like. Okay. And then we have Clan Gangrous. So, Lots and lots of additional SKAVEN choices, pretty much scattered all over the map, if I recall correctly. You've got up here, you've got over here, you've got down here, a little bit more down there. Yeah, as you can see, they're pretty much all over the place. Well, anyway, the one that I wanted to go ahead and do a little bit more of a deep dive into is the newest addition here, which is Clan Gnaw. As you can see, right here they are. This is going to be a little bit farther southwest, I guess, of where Clan Moors begins. So let's go ahead and take a look here at the... Oh, this is a placeholder. Dag nabbit, I was looking forward to learning some lore about these guys. That's all right. I'm sure those guys, the mod team will update that in time. Learn how to talk, Michael. So these guys are diplomatic relations with the faction of Clan Baldur. Okay, so that's interesting. Trapping pits. Clan Gnaw actively hunts down, traps, and enslaves others who dwell in the Badland, whether they be orc, goblin, or beast. Okay, that's interesting flavor, but I don't exactly know how that translates on the functionality wise. Construction cost plus 100% for all non-Gnaw military buildings. Okay, so you're going to be using a lot of these right here. These are obviously new units that are added as a result of this mod. And we'll be using those as opposed to any of the traditional Clan Rat and Skaven Slave, those types of units, because of this additional cost for the buildings, additional cost to recruit them, additional upkeep for them. So obviously very much incentivized to use the new units and presumably the new buildings that allow for those new units. And then leadership effects we've got, or Lord effects, excuse me. Leadership +8 when fighting in desert battles. Okay, very interesting. And Vanguard deployment during desert battles. All right. Doesn't feel overpowered, that's for sure. We'll see how strong these units are. Maybe they're going to feel a little bit stronger than your traditional Clan Rats and the like, but I don't know. We'll see. That's the whole point of trying this out. Like I said, this is going to be a little bit of a deep dive. As always, we got Legendary very hard, so let's go ahead and jump into it. All right, so all of that was Michael from a few days ago. This is current day Michael now. I'm going to be talking about how this campaign played out, because it is kind of a tricky one. So yeah, it's going to be one that I think it might help to have a little bit of extra information going into it, or else you're looking to maybe suffer a quick defeat, or at least I did in my first playthrough, let me put it that way. Another thing I wanted to mention right away is beautiful loading screens. There's a couple of them as the mod got updated. I noticed this loading screen has changed a couple of times. Anyway, always really beautiful artwork. I was very impressed by that. All right, so the first thing to keep in mind when you get started here is you don't actually start out at war with anyone. You're actually a little bit northwest of Clan Moors, excuse me, not southwest of it like I thought, but yeah, northwest of Clan Moors, and Clan Moors could very well end up being an enemy in time, but you don't start out at war with them or with anybody else. In fact, most likely what you're going to run into, at least what I found out from several playthroughs with this faction, is your first enemy is likely to, or your first real significant enemy is likely to be Warzag. But we'll get more into him in just a moment. As I mentioned, you're not at war with them, but very first thing that you probably are going to want to do is to go to war here with the ogres. Now, what I ended up doing is I waited one turn, because ogres, starting out with a camp, which is kind of the equivalent of a minor settlement battle, as well as a secondary army real close by, ogres being significantly stronger than SKAVEN units, I decided to allow myself one turn of recruitment before I took them on. As far as your units are concerned, they do feel very much like SKAVEN. They're obviously very similar to the units that they're replacing. Savage Clan Rats are replacing regular Clan Rats, for example. They're a little bit lower on armor, but they do make up for that with some physical resistance. So it pretty much feels like a wash to me. They are, again, sort of the type of units that break a lot, as SKAVEN often do. But then, of course, you could rally them and throw them back into the fight over and over again. And so, like I said, it feels very much like normal SKAVEN would. Your third tier units, which are your ambush netters and big game hunters and units like that, they are roughly the equivalent of your storm vermin, which is to say that they're slightly better than the clan rats. They are also quite a bit more expensive than clan rats, and so I found myself focusing more on the savage clan rats in the early game because my economy really couldn't sustain too many of these third tier units. As far as your legendary lord is concerned, I'm going to really quickly scroll through his different abilities here. They don't unlock right away, which is a little bit unfortunate because they would be very, very useful to have earlier in the game than what I was able to unlock them in. But they are quite powerful indeed. You're able to produce a duplicate of yourself. You're able to really buff your third tier units up pretty well. Got a couple of other really powerful abilities as well. So definitely a legendary lord that in time will build up to providing some real value. Doesn't really start out as one of your stronger ones, however, that is for sure. In terms of your settlement and buildings, well, you start out with only a single minor settlement, as you can see, which pretty much makes getting your first major settlement a priority. In this case, the closest one is going to be Ekrend here, which is, of course, the one that belongs to Wurzag. And as I mentioned, Wurzag is likely to become your nemesis here in the early game. So that's going to be a high priority once you get started. For the military buildings, you've got this snare nest, which is really important. Remember how you have to pay extra, in fact 100% extra, so double for any of the non-Clan Gnaw military buildings and units. This will allow you to recruit your ranged, like your javelin units, as well as your hero called the Beastalkers. Let's talk about heroes for just a second. Instead of the usual heroes that you're used to playing the SKAVEN, you're instead going to get two new kinds. These Beastalkers, which are sort of a hybrid melee and missile unit, as well as your Wild Seekers, which are basically your version of the Grey Seers. So these are going to be your wizard units. And then, of course, you're going to want to have the regular barracks building, which in this case is what allows you to recruit your savage version of your SKAVEN slaves and your clan rats. And I mentioned the replacement for the storm vermin. You do start out with both of these two types of military buildings in your starting settlement, so you can go ahead and get started on recruiting your specialized units right away, which is good. Now, in terms of your higher tier units, higher than tier 3 that is, instead of doing the recruiting like you would normally do with most SKAVEN, you're going to actually have monsters that become available to you via different methods in something called the trapping pit. So you will, as you just play through your campaign, you will get monsters added to this. For example, sometimes you get some from raiding, sometimes you get some from winning battles, and of course there's a rite here that you can perform, which will also add some of those available to the trapping pit. I will say I don't want to exactly say a criticism of the mod, but one thing that I would like to see expanded upon in the future is adding a few more monsters to this. For the most part, most of them don't feel like particularly powerful monsters, and so you're going to have pretty slim pickings when it actually comes to elite units in your armies. The Feral Wyvern, I guess, is currently the most powerful one that you can get, but yeah, it's not a whole lot of choice when it comes to your really good units, unfortunately. And so, like I said, I just did a little recruiting on turn number 1. Turn number 2, I go ahead and declare war on the ogres and attack their raiding camp here. And it's not really the world's most difficult battle. You do want to fight it manually, though, or else you will suffer a little bit too much in the way of casualties. But you can just take your relatively cheap units that you have in abundance and spread them all around and attack from every angle, and eventually you should be able to take down the ogres without really suffering too much in the way of heavy losses. Like I mentioned, these units do play out very similarly to how you would expect the SKAVEN to, What they lose in armor, they do gain in physical resistance. I actually found out over the course of the campaign that even these low-tier units do hold out fairly well. They hold up fairly well against some pretty tough opponents, because you will find yourself fighting against not just these ogres, but some dwarfs as well in the early going. And, you know, they hold their own. They're not great, but they're certainly more or less what you would expect. And coming out of your very first battle, you will notice that you immediately start getting some of these monsters added to your trapping pit. So they will be available for you to recruit basically instantaneously as soon as you want them. Now, one thing that I did notice was that there were some times where the message that tells you how you earned a particular type of monster is incorrect. Like, for example, how it tells me that I have earned these wolves for slaughtering captives after a battle at sea, which is obviously not what just happened. However, I don't know if that just means there's other ways to achieve these wolves. That's maybe the most common way of doing it, and I earned it a different way. Or maybe it might just be that the tooltip is flat out wrong. But either way, I'm sure that's it's a pretty minor issue anyway, and it's something that I'm sure will be brought to their attention, and the mod team probably will fix that. In terms of other minor problems with the mod, there are a couple things that are mislabeled. One of them being that in the hero recruitment panel, it still says chieftains, even though you can no longer recruit chieftains. With this mod, those have been replaced by beast stalkers. These things are really quite minor, but if there were one thing that I was going to be a little bit critical of this mod team about, it's that I've noticed this before as well. There are a couple of times where it feels like there's a little bit of attention to detail that is sometimes missing in these mods. Now, having said that, it's probably because there's so much bonus content and functionality in these mods that it's really hard to stay on top of literally everything. So I'm trying not to be particularly critical because, like I said, it's really kind of nitpicking, but it is something that I have noticed a few times. The other thing is you should be aware, obviously, that when it comes to big overhaul mods like this, or mods that add an awful lot of content, I should say, the possibility of new bugs being introduced is quite prevalent. It can happen, particularly whenever CA does updates. And so it is why I tend personally to stick with the much smaller mods that do only one or two little things, because those are much less likely to break. But anyway, it's just something to be aware of. And I'm sure that most people are already familiar with the fact that sometimes you have to wait for mods to be updated whenever CA releases their own updates. In terms of the technology tree, the new units have been added in the appropriate places. So, for example, your technologies that affect clan rats will now also affect your savage clan rats, things like that. Overall, however, there aren't really a whole lot of improvements that you're going to get to your units from the technology tree, which again is kind of makes sense. It is pretty consistent with how the SKAVEN are overall, but it is a little bit of a shame because I do feel like as you get into the mid-game and the later game, it would be nice to have a little bit more of a roster of stronger units that you can field that are not prohibitively expensive. And so back to the campaign, I mentioned how in my campaign Wurzag ended up becoming my nemesis. Well, I did finish off the ogres and I started expanding northward into Scabby Eyes territory, and the next thing I knew, Wurzag was declaring war on me. And unfortunately, Wurzag does start out quite a bit stronger than your own Clan Gnaw faction starts out. In fact, if we jump back to the beginning of the game again, I can show you that you actually start out as faction rank 400 in terms of your strength. So obviously, you're starting out very, very weak indeed. And, well, long story short, I was able to win a couple of victories against Wurzag in relatively minor battles, but then he declared himself a Wa and invaded me from multiple directions, and it was too much for me to overcome. So, lesson learned here from my first campaign with Clan Gnaw is be very, very careful about going to war with Wurzag, because particularly once they declare the Wa, they're going to really be able to overpower you. And so for my second attempt, wouldn't you know it, Wurzag decided to declare war on me even earlier in the campaign, this time on turn 8. And I was trying to build up my defenses in order to prepare for him. I laid an ambush and I was able to fight off his first invasion in one battle. And this felt like the first really good test of how these Savage SKAVEN hold up in battle. In this case, Savage SKAVEN versus Savage Orcs. And they did pretty well. Overall, we were able to hold our own. We did end up getting a victory out of this first fight. And then Wurzag said, "Oh, you want to be like that, do you?" and brought 2 more armies forward to attack the remnants of our fairly heavily beaten up army at that point. And yeah, so once again, second chance, another failure. So obviously the moral of the story here is be extremely careful about dealing with Wurzag in the early going of this campaign. And so now, having learned my lesson in my third try, I did go ahead and make nice with Wurzag as early as possible. He went to war with Skarbrand, and so I immediately declared war on Skarbrand as well in exchange for a non-aggression pact with Wurzag, and this completely changed the direction of my campaign. What that did was free me up to go ahead and make war with the dwarfs, in this case with Barak Var, just to my north after I had finished dealing with Scabii. And then, of course, Thorgrim Grudgebearer ended up confederating Barak Var, so I had to turn around and deal with all of the dwarves instead of just one minor little faction. But it's okay. The reason why I'm even mentioning what the different enemies that I took on were is because I think it's an important lesson to learn that you need to be prepared for Wurzag, either be ready to go to war with him right away, or else make nice with him so that you can go to war with others. But be wary that your campaign can take some unexpected turns from the very beginning. So I'm not going to go through all of the details of how all of these different wars played out for me. It was a lot of fun. It's extremely challenging in the early going. Barak Var ended up being the first major settlement that I was able to take, and I was not quite done fighting Thorgrim by the time I did eventually then go back to war with Wurzag again. He ended up breaking our non-aggression pact and declaring war on me a second time. And in any case, you get lots and lots of fighting with this faction, that is for sure. Nobody around you really likes you very much, and they all seem fairly happy to go to war with you at their earliest convenience, and they're pretty much all stronger than you are from the very beginning, so it does make for a very challenging campaign indeed. Now, one thing to keep in mind, I will say that in fighting against Thorgrim, you do run into the age-old problem in this game when you're playing on the highest difficulty settings, and that is that I was able to wipe out all of Thorgrim's army, but there was at least one time where I was not able to do enough damage to to Thorgrim himself. That is going to be an issue with your SKAVEN units, not just this faction, but pretty much most of your SKAVEN factions would have this problem. But I did notice later on that there is a skill that you can use to reduce the defenses of an enemy lord or hero, which would have come in very handy if I had had it available to me in this battle. But at least in the early going, this is going to be a real issue where your units just are going to struggle to do enough damage to enemy lords and heroes that are heavily armored like Thorgrim is. And then one other issue popped up that needs to be talked about, and that is I ended up running into a campaign either ending or at least campaign pausing bug when I loaded back into the game after winning a battle against the Beastmen who had come out of nowhere to attack me. And that was, as you can see here, a graphical glitch where all of our armies appear to have disappeared. So yeah, this was rather unfortunate. I did go back and make sure that I had updated to the latest version of the mod, and the SKAVEN asset pack still has this particular graphical glitch. So I'm going to unfortunately have to sit back and wait to see if any fixes happen to the mod in the near future. But in any case, hopefully that was enough to give a fairly good sense of how this campaign goes. Again, glitches like this are something that do sometimes pop up in the mods that tend to change an awful lot, and so it is unfortunately sort of something that you just need to be prepared to accept every once in a while. So anyway, overall, pretty fun campaign. Like I said, it gives you a very SKAVEN-y experience, but it's certainly different than any of the other factions that you normally play. As I mentioned before, I'm going to mess around with some of the other SKAVEN factions as well. Hopefully that graphical glitch is sort of an anomaly. It's not something that's going to happen all the time. But in any case, really impressive job by the modding team. It's a little bit unfortunate about the error that did end up causing me to have to pause this particular campaign. This is only a campaign that I would recommend if you really like a good challenge, because as I mentioned, you're kind of surrounded by some enemies that start out much stronger than you are. Most of them don't like you. You can expect to not really have much in the way of friends and a lot in the way of enemies right away. Your units are SKAVEN, so they're not real great. You can kind of make up for that in terms of quantity, except that your economy starts out very poor and it's very difficult to build that up. And your third-tier units are reasonably expensive considering they're not really all that much of a higher quality than your second-tier units are. But anyway, I know that there's others out there who are gluttons for punishment like I am, so I always do enjoy a nice, tough campaign, and this one certainly provides that. In any case, I think I'll go ahead and leave it there. Please let me know in the comments if you have any experience with this clan, with this campaign, or with this mod overall. Maybe there's some of the other SKAVEN clans that are added that you would recommend, and so please feel free to do so. Anyway, I'll go ahead and say thank you all so much for watching and listening, and I will see you in the next video.